Welcome to Across Africa, our weekly roundup of stories from across the continent. I'm Georgia Calvin-Smith, and coming up, communities in the Tunisian border region of Kasserine live in fear of extremists hiding out in the mountains. Security forces struggle to flush out jihadists who sometimes brutally target locals they accuse of working with authorities against them. Also, Kenya is the fourth largest tea exporter in the world and number one in Africa. Its position is being further secured as a side effect of ongoing tensions between India and Pakistan. And the search for white gold. Truffle hunters brave the heat of the Libyan desert in search of the prized pale fungus. Known locally as turfers, they're some of the only things that grow in the treacherous sands. But first, Tunisian security forces have been targeting Islamic State-linked militants suspected of having killed shepherds in the region of Kasserine. Amongst their victims was a boy called Mohamed Lakhdar Makhloufi, whose body was found last month on a mountainside. IS group claimed responsibility. Security forces regularly search the mountainous border areas in a bid to flush out jihadist groups who hide there. Local communities often get caught in the crossfire. Our correspondents report.
One must cross deep, river-carved ravines before arriving at the first houses in this area of central Tunisia near the Algerian border. This woman is a relative of Mohamed Lakhdar Makhloufi. His decapitated body was found on the mountain in February after it was left there by jihadists.
On Tuesday morning, he didn't come home as he usually did. I didn't have phone credit, so I didn't call him until the afternoon. His phone was off that day and Wednesday as well. Everyone went to the mountain to search for him, the whole family and the neighbors. We found his head and then his body 50 meters away. It was 2 hours before the police and military arrived.
Since his death, this woman and her children don't feel safe. Some families have since fled in fear. Others face a dilemma: stay and risk being targeted by extremists operating nearby, or leave their home and source of income.
We're afraid the mountain is now off limits, but it represents our livelihood. Our sheep graze and drink water there. We go there to find wood.
A few kilometers away in the region of Kasserine, locals have grown used to seeing armed groups come down from the mountain for provisions or to escape from soldiers.
They're smart. They know where to go. If soldiers ambush the mountaintop, the terrorists come down and hide in these ravines. They move a lot.
This man doesn't have faith in Tunisian authorities and bought a gun in Algeria to protect himself.
People living in the mountains are caught in a crossfire. Police often accuse us of helping terrorists without informing authorities. But if we inform them, we must leave home to avoid being killed.
The National Guard patrols this largely rural area. They rely on communities to help with intelligence gathering, but informants can pay a high price for assisting security services. Extremist operators had accused Mohamed Lakhdar Makhloufi of being a spy.
Citizens help us and we try to protect these areas at the foot of the mountain. But this doesn't mean we can be in the proximity of every house. Unfortunately, these villages are dispersed across kilometers of land, so complete coverage is impossible.
Over the years, Tunisia has made progress in its fight against terrorism. There has been no large-scale attack for 3 years now. But in the mountains, the threat remains. On March 19th, Tunisia's National Guard killed 3 terrorists in the region.
In Mauritania, women's rights activists are fighting an uphill battle for tougher penalties for sexual violence and discrimination. It's a conservative nation, and the topic is divisive. One draft piece of legislation aimed at punishing violence against women more severely has already been rejected twice by Parliament.
Zara has lived through a mother's worst nightmare. Months after the attack on her 5-year-old daughter, emotions are still raw.
He came, he took my daughter whilst I was asleep. He took her away and he raped her. She had to have an operation.
The rapist, a serial paedophile, was sentenced to 10 years in jail. But according to the Association of Women Heads of Family, sexual offenders in Mauritania are often released well before the end of their sentences. There are calls for more extensive legislation with regards to women's rights, and in 2016, new legislation was drafted seeking much harsher penalties for sexual violence.
We need this law because we know that violence against women is skyrocketing.
But in this religiously conservative country, the bill proved to be too controversial. It was rejected by Parliament twice and has now been withdrawn by the government.
We cannot adopt a law which contradicts Sharia law, which is the basis of the nation's constitution.
Opponents of the bill also criticise its wording. They say that the notion of gender in the title would pave the way for a possible defence of homosexuality, which is illegal in Mauritania. But among those that rejected the draft legislation, some are willing to seek a compromise to achieve better protection of women's rights.
Women clearly need this protection. No matter how tolerant our society is with regard to women, they're still considered as lesser in many regards, in mindsets and in many practices.
It's an opinion that's echoed by the NGO Human Rights Watch. In their report published in September, they said that even the draft legislation would not go far enough in tackling these issues.
Kenya is the fourth largest tea exporter in the world and number one in Africa. Its position is being further secured as a side effect of ongoing tensions between India and Pakistan. The long brewing struggle between the neighbours has seen Pakistan scaling back on tea imports from India, and so it's turned to Kenya, which is happy to bag the business.
Tea pickers are busy in these fields that just a few months ago nearly halted production after the price per kilogram of tea fell below €2. The drop of over 50 cents in 1 year meant warehouses full of tea couldn't sell their stock on the international market.
It worries me as being employed, because when there's not enough tea, I can either end up losing my job. The tea is the main cash crop in this region, so if there's no tea, actually there's no work.
After a rough start to the year, Kenya's tea industry seems to have found a solution in Pakistan. In 2018, the country imported 40% of Kenyan tea output, but now has even greater needs. Thanks to a renewed conflict, Pakistan can no longer buy Indian tea, a boon for producers here who can't rely on the local market.
Assuming like last year, I did about 18 million kilograms of tea. And what is taken by the Kenyans in this area maybe is 500 kilograms. Where do I take the other teas? I have to look for market.
In January, Kenya sold 30 million euros of tea to Islamabad. And with the Indo-Pakistani crisis ongoing, these numbers will likely increase. Industry experts say the impact could be hugely positive.
We're looking at a 10 to 15% increase in the price over time. Given there's an election in India and Narendra Modi wants to look tough, I don't see the tension subsiding yet, which means that the price of tea for Kenyan tea should remain strong.
Indicators suggest 2019 production will be lower than in 2018, but an increase in price could offset the output slowdown. Last year, Kenya exported over €1 billion worth of tea.
Polo has been played in Nigeria for over 100 years now, but it very definitely is not a sport for the masses. Nearly all the teams are owned by multimillionaires, and the scene caters to the same. The Lagos International Polo Tournament attracts a glitzy set that turns out as much for the fashion as for the sport.
It's West Africa's biggest polo tournament. Teams from 3 different continents came to Lagos. It's also an opportunity for Nigeria's richest families to socialize and sip cocktails.
Polo has shifted from just the sport to a fashion statement, and in the UK it's the same. And for me, it's something fun, it's something playful, something whimsical, something comfortable essentially, and that's why I enjoy it. That's why I chose to dress like this, a bit of color, a bit of pop.
Polo has been played in Nigeria for over 100 years. Nearly all the teams here are owned by local billionaires.
Well, it's an expensive sport because, you know, your horses are like babies, you know, maintenance is not easy. Today they can be well, tomorrow they can have, you know, malaria, a fever, you know, colic, or even get injured on the field.
Most Nigerians will never play polo. The country has the world's highest number of people living in extreme poverty. Nearly 90 million people, that's half the population, live on less than $1.90 a day. A far cry from the cost of a polo horse, which can be about $40,000.
There's international demand for Libya's white truffles. Truffle hunters wander across the country's deserts looking for the prized fungus. Known as turfers, they're one of the only things that grow under the hostile sands. Pickers risk running into gangs based in the desert, but demand for the delicacy is as high as the risk that comes in searching for them. Valérie D'Equipe has the story.
Roaming the desert in search of a hidden treasure, Libya's white truffle. Each year before springtime, Milad Mohammed treks across sand dunes to look for the rare fungus. Besides some wild grass, white truffle is the only thing that grows in dry land, thanks to a combined effect of rain and cold temperatures at night.
Even the small truffles have a special taste. In the past, people used to cut the truffles into pieces and leave them to dry so they become soft and they could use them as a spice.
Milad harvests truffles as a hobby. He sells them to dealers who come from Libya and abroad to get a piece of the precious mushroom. Over the past few years, the price per kilo has tripled to $33 as harvesting white truffle becomes increasingly difficult due to unfavorable weather conditions and Libya's unrest since the fall of Muammar Gaddafi. The revenue from the sale of truffles still provides a much-needed source of income for many in the region.
The truffle harvest this year has been abundant. The price is good. It has saved people in need.
Although not as prestigious as European black truffle, the white variety is a highly coveted ingredient for Bedouins, who traditionally prepare it with rice or meat.
Well, that's it for Across Africa for now. Thanks very much for joining us, and do so again if you can. Take care.